Ahmad, welcome to Under the Banyan Tree. How's it going?
I'm doing great. How about you? Thanks for having me here.
Thanks for joining. I'm doing well. So for context, I met you over a year ago. I joined your pre-seed round with some world-class investors in that round, and recently you closed your seed round. And I want to point to some of the data points around Langbase's growth. I think in the past 3 months, you've 10x'd your growth from product adoption. I read that you have over 1.2 billion agent runs in a 1 month alone, which is phenomenal. You've launched your new vibe coding product, command.new, and that's deployed over 145,000 AI agents, hopefully into production, which we'll talk about. But tell us about your seed round. Who led the round? What does that mean for the future of Langbase? Tell us more.
Awesome. Well, first of all, thanks a lot for backing us. Your support has been super meaningful. So Langbase is an agents lab, and we create both the agents infrastructure, so you can build, deploy, and scale AI agents completely serverless, especially the memory part of it, right? Which is very, very hard to do, right? And we also create agents, right? Command was our first agent that you could use to vibe code any AI agents and agent infra at the same time. So you would just say, I want an agent to chat with my data, and we'll just write all of the code that you can see and edit. It will create all of the provision infrastructure behind the scene using Langbase, and it will deploy it for you, right? And over the course of 1 year, we have been a company, right? We've had massive growth. The idea behind this was like, why are building and deploying agents so complicated, right? And when I saw that, most of this space was written with bloated frameworks, where we could easily have really good AI native cloud primitives that you can use to build agents. I wanted to build a company that would especially democratize, the access to deploying an agent like a website, right? How easy it is for you to think about a website for your business or whatever, and hire somebody, or by yourself deploy one, right? That was the initial idea behind Langbase, to democratize access of a really good and easy to use serverless scalable agents infrastructure. But we ended up building agents as well that can help, like, for example, I don't know how you can use Lovable or Replit to build a website. You can use Command to build your coding agents, or your support agents or whatnot, right? And in the course of this 1 year, we have now just closed our seed round, led by Preston Werner Ventures. Tom Preston Werner, founder of GitHub, truly believed in us from day one. They were like almost the first check-in, even in our pre-seed, and they completely doubled down on our growth. We have been processing massive amount of agent runs and executions. Like last month we closed at 1.2 billion agent runs in a month, in 700 terabytes of memory, vector data process, right? So it's just massive, and we are like this is like our 0 to 1, and we are going to go to 100, right? So I can't believe that a small team, less than 10 people, can pull off something, at this scale. I think AI is helping a lot in helping us move really, really fast, and we want to do just that for your business or your agent needs.
Amazing. I think this quote on your website from Tom, the former CEO and founder of GitHub, really embodies what you're building at Langbase. But he says, if I were building GitHub for the software of today with LLMs, Langbase is what it would look like. And it makes sense why he would lead your seed round, and being willing to talk about Langbase in public like that. What's your relationship been like with Tom? Like how have those insights that he shared help you shape how you've built the company, whether it's building the team or building the product or just go to market at, it would be great to hear about that.
Yeah, so I think if you know a little bit about me, my background is all open source, right? I started from the early days of WordFag, where I started contributing to the HTML5 spec. We used to call it Web 2.0. then PHP form spec, and ultimately ended up contributing a lot to the core software of React, WordPress, later on Node.js, Next.js, ended up in the Linux Foundation, the Node.js, the OpenJS group. Then became part of the Open API Spec initiative, and ended up on Google Developers Advisory Board, all through building a lot of open source software. I think at its peaks, I think I had like more than 200 open source projects, small little different libraries and packages that would get like I think they get like 40-50 million downloads a year. So as you can imagine, a lot of what I do is open source, and GitHub is the open source company. So I ended up becoming part of a lot of different working groups at GitHub. Early on, it was the GitHub open source maintainers group, right? I think it was a very small group early on, like 20 people or so, that would continuously chat with the founder in the founding team of GitHub. So obviously, ended up, around Tom or whatnot. And I think about 11 years ago, I got Facebook to open source React. And that all happened on GitHub. GitHub actually went down because of the issue I had created, right? So we crossed paths a lot, Tom and I, in different stages. And then I ended up becoming a GitHub star. GitHub star is this amazing group of people who have contributed a lot to open source. I ended up on NASA's Ingenuity Mars helicopter mission through my open source code. And I think somehow overall, it just made sense to chat a lot about what I was doing with Tom. And that's why I mentioned he was like the first check-in. I was still figuring out if I should accept that job offer from one of the big model companies, or build this as a company. And he, along with a bunch of amazing founders, like founder of Socket, Feroz, founder of Replit, Amjad, and a bunch of amazing people like CEO of Supabase, Paul, Logan from OpenAI, he's now at Google Gemini, right? CTO of Cloudflare. They all ended up backing what we were building here at Langbase, and I ended up bringing together, I think, one of the most cracked teams. We've been working a lot. We're like, I think, probably about to cross like 10 million lines of code for a 1-year-old company. That's a lot, right? Tom has been a significant help throughout this last year as well, right? So Tom and his GPs, both are named David, by the way, David Price and David Tryson. They've been deep into our product. They are both our customers and users, right? And investors, right? So we are figuring out how to build this entire community of sorts without actually becoming a marketplace. I don't potentially like the idea of marketplaces this late into the era of web, but I think you could potentially think of Langbase as where people can build their agents and they can share that those agents both with public and internally with their teams, right? So in some ways, I think it often felt like this is what the modern GitHub would look like, right? Which was not just about software, but about agentic software, which is how our unified gateway over 600 plus LLMs work, right? Which is how our entire repository of compute works, the pipe in the agent protocol, where you can have any MCP or any kind of JavaScript or Python code that we can run on our compute. And in grand scheme of things, you can also collaborate on it, right? You can, like, for example, you're experimenting on an agent and you change the model or some part of its context engineering, and you want to share that with some of your team members, like a GitHub pull request. That is what you can do on Langbase as well, right? For agents. So I think it just made sense to partner with somebody who has done this before for the open source software. We used to call it software 2.0, and a lot of people, I think, agree that this is software 3.0. A lot of the workflows that we used to have in our software, SDLC, are absolutely changing due to how much code agents are now writing, right? And how much pervasive AI workflows are. So yeah, pretty excited overall.
So with the software want to dive into some of this. So with the software 3.0 versus 2.0, I want to build on that narrative. So, you've met Tom throughout the years. We're one of the most productive sort of developers, I think, in the GitHub ecosystem. Your rap sheet of awards that you've won is, I've never really seen that before, and we'll talk about that later in the podcast today, including writing code that helped get actual progress for a Mars rover. We'll talk about that and what that looked like. But I want to stay specific on the market / the problems that we're kind of seeing in the market today. So, we have a lot of developers out there. We have AI researchers, we have data scientists, we have machine learning engineers. So there's different audience types, but they're all converging on, hey, what can AI agents do for the business context that I'm working on? And I'm sure you've heard about that MIT study. Something like 95% of Gen AI pilots are failing or not making it into production. So you're really at the front, I think, of building the infrastructure that's needed to make these agents productive in business environments. But what pain points, we'll start there. What pain points are you seeing developers face today when they're trying to build and deploy an AI agent, which led you to believe, hey, I want to build Langbase with these opinions in mind? Like, tell us about the problems developers are facing, and then we can go through some more questions to talk about the space in more detail.
Yeah, I think there are two ways I can answer this question, right? One is to unpack where the community is headed overall, right? Where is all of this mess going, right?
Sure.
And the other one is the builder part, right? A lot of people think that anyone can build, right? But I think I find this a little bit too naive, right? Everybody can build, but I think there will come a time when everybody will be able to build and deploy at the same time. Really, really good. Like, I remember, like, maybe 2 months ago, I did a talk at AI Engineering World Fair in San Francisco, and at the same time I did a talk in the GitHub's HQ. There were, like, I think 300 plus builders there, and I asked how many of you have actually built an agent. I think like 90% of people have actually built an agent, right? Which was great. And then I asked the most rated question: how many of these agents that you have built, how many of you have actually deployed them? And they're, like, live and in production. And they're like, I don't know, like 4 or 5 hands up, right?
Out of three, and that was out of 300.
Out of 300, right?
And for
And
listeners' context, that means out of the 300 people, 90% said, yeah, I've built an agent, but only 3 or 4 people said, I've taken that agent and put it in production where it interacted with a customer and did something for the business and made the agent even do something, let alone, you probably didn't ask, was that agent accurate enough? Did it perform up to the expectations? Did it hallucinate? You're just asking, did you even get the agent into the customer environment where it could interact and do something for the business?
Yeah. Right. So this is scary to me, right? like why is this happening, right? I have different, like, I have so many, hot takes on this, like, but overall, I think this is a much bigger change than what many of us had hoped for, right? When I started Langbase, they were like, maybe 2 competitors I could see in the market, right? There was LangChain, there was Llama Index. By the way, we just crossed number of installs on our SDK, like I think much more than 1.5x to Llama Index, right? Which is a much bigger and older player than us in this market. Right?
Which I think you were at over 1 million SDK downloads, which was already more than them.
Yeah, we are doing, I think, 230,000 downloads a month or something, 230K, right? So, so what's happening here is there's a lot of noise in the market, right? A lot of AI slop, right? A lot of people, even like OpenAI, try to do this. They started this GPT store that no one remembers now, right? Those custom GPTs, like, which ended up just getting like, oh yeah, I can just use ChatGPT for it, right? It was not like, a lot of people had this idea that prompt engineering would be it, right? And I am guilty of that as well. Like in 2020, Greg Brockman and Sam Altman gave me access to GPT-3. I had written this Corona CLI thing, which was like Perplexity, but for COVID data. It had gone absolutely viral. So I think 10 billion API calls a month or so. It was like right in the midst of COVID, right? I think it was like June or July 2020. And Greg Brockman was chatting about how they were building an API on top of their models on this non-profit company called OpenAI that I had never heard of in 2020, right? So I reached out and we ended up chatting, and they gave me access to their new model, which was just 1 month old, called GPT-3. I ended up playing around with it, and that's how actually Langbase started, right? Langbase was the first playground of sorts. It was not a company back then; it was just a silly side project. It was a playground where I thought, like, you don't have to fine tune a model anymore. That was the old machine learning, right? Fine tuning only generally teaches a model how to behave. It doesn't really increase the knowledge, or it doesn't really change the tone, and just takes too long compared to prompt engineering, right? But there was not really a name for this thing, right? Nobody was calling this agents, right? So I ended up coining this term called pipe, prompt instructions personalization engine. It's like a small piece of compute, like Docker. It had everything in it. It had your prompts, so you could prompt engineer. It had your instructions. So even after prompt engineering, if your users want to change the instructions, like only care about this when responding to this particular user, that part. And then it had a memory layer, the personalization layer into it, right? Uh, the second PIPE, right? The personalization layer took off. It started from RAG, where we ended up building our own vector store, to building a re-ranker model, plus a lot of other things. Like, for example, if you have two multiple or three or four multiple RAG stores, in your user asks a question that kind of relates to multiple of those RAG stores, how do you kind of rank and relate and create relations in reasoning over multiple RAG data sets or multiple vector stores, right? So we ended up calling this the personalization layer, the memory for your agents, and it's absolutely serverless. You can have, I don't know, 10 plus memories. Each of them can have terabytes of data in them, and it still responds like within a second or whatnot, right? So, and then the last part was experiments, evols, pipe, right? And this entire thing was a piece of compute and storage put together in a cloud infrastructure. So you don't have to worry about how to scale this and how to deploy and actually get a lot of value out of it, right? And in doing so, I wanted people to get out of this habit of like, I have to either just prompt engineer or just fine tune. There's a lot more you can do with a while loop around multiple agents and multiple models put together, when you can derive the right type of contextual, what should I say, a contextual flow of sorts, right? Now we do have a name for it, right? Now we have kind of, as a community, kind of agreed to call it context engineering, right? Context engineering is not prompt engineering. It's not fine tuning. It's a lot of different things. And Andrej Karpathy basically says it's science and art put together, right? So you have to figure out what the user wants, because they won't tell you the right thing, right? So you have to uh, basically do a multiple set of LLM calls to figure out what are they trying to ask, right? And once you have figured that out, you have to figure out, okay, so this might be relevant to a user is asking for what happened to my last order, right? Right. So this might be relevant to the user's history of how they order and their actual order history. So you need the context from the database plus the context from their past conversations. Maybe this is our third strike. We have not delivered that third order in the right time, and they must be really pissed off. Like, both of those contexts are really important when we are going to respond to that user, right? Nobody's going to just agree to like, oh, this is an AI slop response that I just got. Nobody's going to be happy with it, right? So how do we figure out like which data sets to combine? So we need to do a lot of reasoning and re-ranking around that, right? And then once you have done that, you basically come up with this bunch of different pieces of context that you smash together, and then you probably try to send it to one of the best, state-of-the-art LLMs like Claude, Opus, or Sonnet, or GPT-5 from OpenAI, or Gemini 2.5 Pro or whatnot, right? And that model basically in parallel will respond to multiple streams or multiple branches of explorations that you are doing to answer that user, right? While that user is waiting. And then you have to maybe call some tools which are APIs, right? Which is like, I don't want to embed all of the user real-time data because that would be silly. So I'm going to take that data out real time when the user is asking that question. And that would require some form of API call to some form of tools like, I don't know, read my last email from Gmail. I don't want to embed all of your emails for no reason. I can just, for this particular question, take out that last email. So that's the tool call, right? Now you can see how this is becoming more and more, complex, right? And this is complex, right? In dealing with this and building with this, and then this is new form of engineering. There are no set best practices.
Right.
This is complex enough. And now you have to all of a sudden figure out, oh shit, I need to uh, host this in a way that it scales as well, right? That is where I think the line is being drawn nowadays, right? A lot of people are able to use some open source framework or whatnot, or their, a models on SDK to build a bunch of different amazing agents. But when they have built the system that kind of works locally, and they have to like, okay, how do I deploy this thing now? Right? That is a complete other nightmare, right? And that is where a lot of people stop, because it's not just engineering. Now you're talking about DevOps. Now you're talking about Kubernetes. Now you're talking about that hefty bill from AWS that everybody's scared from of, right? So it's the thing that was already quite complex, and you need to kind of scale it, and there are no set patterns around it. Like when we started Langbase, none of the existing vector data stores would scale the way we had built memory. We allowed our users to build any number of memories, put any amount of data in it, and send one request, talk to 100 memories. All of them could have like terabytes of data in them, right? None of the vector store vendors would allow us to build something like this. They were like, yeah, you can provision a lot of like you cannot provision like for infinite resources, right? The vector stores were not even ready. So we had to completely rebuild from the grounds up a new type of vector store that was built with object storage. We wasted a bunch of time on it, by the way, right? All to make sure that we can ease the pain of deploying those agents, right? A lot of innovation is happening, right? So here's the painful way that we have seen developers take, right? They pick up an open source framework, which I think is a bad idea. I actually gave this talk why all the production ready agents like Replit, or maybe not Replit, but like I think Cursor. I'm going even more deeper. The bigger like Copilot or Cursor or Windsurf, all of these in Visual. Why are they not built on top of some framework out there like LangChain or whatever? Right? If the frameworks were really good, why are these agents not built on top of these frameworks? Right? So the idea is like, if you think of all of the space, and look at AWS. AWS provides you with different primitives, right? S3 is a primitive to store your data and download it when you need it, right? S3 is not a framework. AWS does not get you to subscribe to some form of framework. It's a cloud infrastructure that is available when you need it. You build your own apps, right? The way you want. And building has become really, really easy nowadays because of AI. Like 90% of my code is being written through coding agents. I can explore this way, I can explore that way. What I cannot do is I cannot subscribe to just one way of doing things, right? I cannot subscribe to just one framework, one idea. It's bigger than that. And this was not apparent like a year ago. It was not apparent to many that this was bigger than this. Like it changes all of engineering, right? Which is how I ended up saying that I think agents are just code. It's not, autonomous entity doing something in a loop. It's just a new form of code that you can write today that is super smart, right? And if this is a new form of code, it needs new form of infrastructure, or you need to build that infrastructure. That wastes a lot of your time, right? So if you pick up something open source, that's fine. If you pick up their own SDK, that's fine. Either you build something very, very simple or something that is absolutely super complex. There's no middle ground, right? And most of the times you end up being in that space where what you're building becomes super complex, right? At that time, you don't want to worry about deployments, right? Like when was the last time an engineering team had an issue with, oh, where is our Git server deployed? Because GitHub fixed it. GitHub is the Git server that most companies use, and nobody's asking like who's the main Git server. Like I remember back in the day before GitHub, we used to like who's holding the main Git, who's the main origin, right? Did that engineer deploy it or that engineer like because there was no one service that would take care of our Git versioning, and before that SVN, right? Uh, Similarly, that is what I thought was required in this space. An easy to deploy infrastructure. So you build with whatever SDKs, whatever frameworks, your agents, and you context engineering it to, I don't know, a degree that is okay with you, right? And then even after making deployment easy, so here's the left side of this, right? The painful way. You pick up an open source framework. And I don't say this like that the open source part is bad. I'm just saying that you pick up some framework that was built by somebody. 90% of that you didn't understand. You are basically an API to that framework. And now you have to figure out how to deploy it or buy their own deployment, right? And then you have to figure out how to scale it. This was the exact problem we were in. Our memory part was working really well, but people wanted infinite amount of memories without actually paying for them before they actually had that usage, right? And none of the memory or vector store, vendors would allow us to do that. They're like, this is not truly serverless, right? We can provision an amount of, compute for you, but like you have to kind of predict how much, right? So the third problem after that is scaling, right? So development, I think, is the easy one. This is really hard to understand. Like, for last 10 years or so before, ChatGPT happened and LLMs happened, development was the hardest piece to figure out, right? It was costly, it not just because you had to hire people who are really smart, but also the time, the opportunity cost of it, right? That would take to explore multiple ideas, multiple directions, right? So development was very hard. Deployment and scaling was easy, right? But in this space, development has become really, really easy because of AI. And deployment and scale are, the next big problems. And I see that the community is kind of ended up over pivoting towards development. Right? Here's a bajillion frameworks. Here's how you evaluate your agent's quality, right? And evaluation kind of happens when you have your agents in production and customers are actively telling you like, this is not working well or whatnot. But when 90% of people are not even getting to the point of caring about quality and they're stuck in this complex deployment and scale of this entire, entirely new problem, that I thought was the problem to solve, right? So you build your own composable AI agents, right? You compose different things like your memory, your tools, your MCPs, everything together. And then you easily in one click or one command deploy it. And it automatically scales it as well, right? That part we kind of abstracted out, not the framework part, not the like, we will tell you how to write code part, right? So I think a lot of the community is now figuring that out. This is how we have this much scale, billions of runs of agents, right? I think we have crossed over 320,000 agents deployed on Langbase now, right? In command has been responsible for, I think, half of those, like 150,000 agents was just command. Command can provision infrastructure, also write the code for multiple agents for you. I'll share this one weird thing. Like, we went to San Francisco AI Engineer Conference, right? And our demo was just this, right? So we had a bunch of laptops and we were like, what agent would you like to build? And people will start like, I want an agent that could do this. I'm like, why don't you just explain it to this laptop, right? And they had this aha moment, like, it will just do it. So it will just write the code, and then instantly they're like, yeah, I know how to write this code, but how do I deploy it? It is deployed. Is it deployed already? How? Where? And that was the interesting part, right?
Right.
Because we had fixed the deployment and scale part, right? So we had engineers coming from Intel, NVIDIA, or whatnot. One created assembly, Intel assembly coding agent of sorts, and had an aha moment. We had a doctor who was interested in building per patient agents, who was already using us. He actually bought the ticket to that conference just to come meet us. He was not an engineer, right? And we had one of the more interesting conversations I had was with this. I can't name the names because the deal is not done yet, but it's a group of different fitness gyms, and what they want to do is they are building per member agents on Langbase, right? So you sign up for their gym subscription. They have like 100 plus locations in the US, right? Uh, you have your personal fitness agent that you have access to and your coach has access to. So they get you to answer a bunch of questions and they get to track a bunch of your activity, no matter which location you are at. And then they throw that into our memory. And you can just continue to chat with it. Like, I'm feeling hungry right now. What should I eat? And it knows what your instructor has put into your memory. Like, this is what you can do. It knows a lot about your health and your activity score or whatnot, and makes things really, really easy. The entire context engineering that is done by their engineers is impressive. But how they are able to move so fast without actually being a tech native company, like it's a fitness studio sorts, right? It's They are not worried about how do we deploy it, how do we scale it, right? Which is, if you go back in time, which is what happened with web. Only very technical people had websites that were live, right? 20 years ago or 25 years ago, right? And then your local gym now has a website, right? Because it's become very easy for them to do it, and they still don't know how the deployment and scale of that website is happening behind the scene, right?
Sure.
So I think that needs to happen before we see mass adoption, right? A lot of people need to figure out, like, oh, this is the type of thing I need, and I don't need to worry about how to deploy and scale this infrastructure. Um, Instead of over pivoting towards, this is the right framework, or that is the right framework, this is the right way to do evals, or that is the, I think that is too technical. There are only really about 1 million machine learning engineers in the world, right?
Right.
Uh, but they're like, I think 50 million people who can send an API request, right? Maybe now a lot more, maybe 100 million, right? When I started Langbase, I estimated there would be like 50 million AI engineers in 5 years, right? So that's what's happening. Every type of engineering in every type of engineering work, like maybe you're a front-end engineer, a full-stack engineer, DevOps engineer, an ML engineer, all of you are in near future, if not already, are going to be deploying AI agents, are going to be building agentic software of sorts, right? So
Right.
that is what we are building this company for, right?
Yeah. I mean, so many good pieces here. And actually, for me, this is the most comprehensive explanation of why so many of the agents being developed on are stuck in the parking lot versus being in production. And on that point that you mentioned about, hey, there's maybe 1 million machine learning engineers, yet there's obviously a lot more developers. I pulled up the memo I wrote to my LPs back on our first pre-seed investment that we did into Langbase. And at that time, my research showed, at least in this memo, there's about 30 million developers worldwide, 300,000 machine learning engineers, and then 30,000 real machine learning researchers, which maybe had a PhD. And so if you think about those different audiences, you go from PhD to machine learning engineer to developer. I think what Langbase is doing is democratizing the ability to get these agents into production for this general audience, from PhD level researcher all the way up to the developer. And I think what you're like boiling it all down, you're saying is like there's 3 core phases in LLM development today. There's development, deployment, and then scaling. And in the development stage, LangChain, Langbase, all these different frameworks, vibe coding, Cursor, Windsurf, we've really over-indexed on the ability now to create code at laser speeds. And you even said it yourself, hey, even 90% of your code is generative AI generated. So that's great. Like we have all of this code being created, but then when you go to transition into deployment stage and then scaling stage, because generative AI adoption, if you get it right, scales faster than any other technology of the past with customers because of how valuable it is. That's where we're getting stuck. So in that room at the GitHub talk you did, when 300 people said basically 9 out of 10 of them were developing agents, but then out of that same 300 people, only 2 or 3 had gotten into production. That's where they're getting stuck, is on deploying the agent and then scaling it. And Langbase is saying, hey, we are going to extrapolate all of these really hard decisions that you'd have to make, because this isn't just scrapping code together. These are like fundamental decisions you'd have to figure out. And now even like this customer example of a gym with 100 locations, we can take their context, take their technical talent, and they're already good on development, but we can equip them to deploy the agents and then scale the agents seamlessly. And now they can just rapidly decide which AI problems do they want to tackle next with LLMs versus over-indexing on building the deployment layer and the scaling layer. Like you're providing that, just like Langbase is doing what GitHub did, or others back in that CI/CD process. You're now doing that.
Yeah, it's like there's an easier way to think about this, right? One is by an example. For example, again, can't name names. It's a huge enterprise customer that is about to expand their contract with us. Their POC became an year-long exploration. Their entire internal, knowledge base exists on top of Langbase now. What they have been able to do is like every user that registers on their platform gets an internal AI agent which has memory, right? So every interaction that they take on that platform is being thrown in a database, which was always true. But now that is also being context engineered into memories and agents. So what they're able to do is, and they only have, I think, in this particular beta, they have like, I think 22,000 users,
Okay.
right? So that on Langbase, they have 22,000 memories and 22,000 agents for every user.
Right.
Personalized memory and personalized agents.
And that's like, hey, everything that they know about that user,
Yes.
their history of whatever, logging in or doing XYZ, buying things, whatever that company is doing, it's literally a memory just dedicated to each person.
Yes, it's an e-commerce brand, by the way, right?
E-commerce. So, okay, nice.
30-year-old company, right? So now they are developing an email system which works something like this. They say, we have this offer, and their master agent already knows everything about that offer and their history, what the company is about. Send this as email to relevant users. And the process kicks in, goes through almost all of the users, all of their memories, figures out, oh, this user has never bought our shoes. So, right, and our shoes are now, would go really well with this thing that they bought back in the day. So maybe this is the user we should probably talk to, or this is a user that is so irrelevant to this particular email, we don't send this email to them. Nobody's actually manually deciding the segmentation of emails. That is completely happening automatically because every user has an AI agent in memory attached to it, right? In their system, I was there like last week doing that demo. In their system, their CEO now can easily pinpoint like who has not used this feature in our platform in last month, and figure out like why are people not looking at this. Like this is a treasure trove of figuring out in Intel that is agentic, right? And they are still starting. This is a surface level exploration right now, right? They are going to expand it to. They have, I think, over 20 million users, so they are still figuring out how to explore this, right? And in about a year, they have done this 20,000 memory, 20,000 agents thing with Langbase, right? They're still building this complex enough context engineer system. What they're not worried about is how do we have 20,000 vector stores, 20,000 different isolated agents and isolated vector stores for each of our users. And are we keeping them up? Are they scaling well? Are we paying extra? Like none of that is their R&D team's concern, because that is what Langbase does for them, right? You can have like a million memory agents running around. Those all of those will be isolated or whatnot. Right? Um, you kind of get this idea, right? But the other way is to look at what happened in the past, and I think we can kind of extrapolate from that to what is going to come next, right? So think of it like this: prompt engineering. Think of prompt engineering as HTML, right? So you got HTML and CSS back in the day. We had some fun websites, but they were they were very basic, right? And almost every other website felt like, oh, this is just a Word document, right? I can do this in Word. I used to hear this a lot when I was building websites early 2000. They were like, oh, I can just have this information in a Word doc and send it to some of my customers. Why do I need a website for that? Right? This is very basic, right? Because that was the time when JavaScript was not a big deal. JavaScript was an absolute mess at that time. Every browser had a different rendering engine. It was very hard to write JavaScript. Like, if JavaScript worked differently, so we got like MooTools, we got jQuery or whatnot, and then we got React, and JavaScript kind of became much more dynamic. And now we see the web is a lot more complex and dynamic, right? So we went from basic HTML, CSS websites to these JavaScript-based interactive systems like Facebook or Instagram and Twitter. All of these are very interactive, right? And they kind of cater to our needs of interaction, right? I clicked this, I saw a pop-up, I unsubscribed, I downgraded from this package. That it's like a lot more dynamic, right? So this is the difference between prompt engineering and context engineering. Prompt engineering is the HTML, right? Where you can just change a prompt and it will change the behavior of the response. You can, give it a little bit more tone, like CSS, more skills a little bit with tools. But context engineering is a whole another animal. Context engineering is the new JavaScript. I'm actually writing this piece. I'm about to publish it. That context engineering is the new JavaScript, right? Context engineering is the dynamic system that everybody in the future will use to make their agents a lot more interactive, a lot more complex, a lot more personal, or a lot more tasteful. So, for example, when your writing agent will write in your company, it will develop the taste of your docs, your essence of how you believe in things, and the same agent in another company will develop the taste of that company. And that is all context engineering, and that is all dynamic, and that requires, again, science and art, and it requires infinite amount of experimentation and this and that. Again, deploying and scaling that would be a nightmare, right? We already see this with demos with people who are scaling really well, right? So right now I can kind of count on my hands how many companies are out there who are running maybe agents 100 million times a month, right? But they are.
What do you think those companies that are doing that, what are they getting right? How are they doing that versus companies, basically versus everybody else?
I think they are just early adopters, right?
Got it.
They are willing to, they're willing to invest money into a problem, right? Gartner, right?
Yeah.
So they continue to experiment with customer support. One year they're like, oh, we fired 80% of our customer support. Next year, we are rehiring them back.
Oh,
right?
wait, just kidding. Right.
Yeah. Right? But they're an early adopter. And early adopters tend to grow massively big. They compound because of their experimentation. And that is, I still think a lot of people think that AI is everywhere. I don't think so. Like, you look around, like how many apps and websites your local services have, right? And probably like 99% of them don't have any agents, right? It's both because it's not that easy to build an agent, and also because adoption has yet to happen, right? I still believe that there will be some linchpin effect. Something will happen that instantly people will realize. Because I remember that time, when web was like, web went from, oh, I don't need a website, to, oh, how do I get a website? In the same thing happened with mobile apps, right? I think that thing will happen one way or the other in next 2 or 3 years, right? And that will be a lot more massive when every engineer will have to figure out like, okay, this is the new normal, right? This is the table stakes for our company to have this business. The moment people will start realizing, oh, people basically started building websites and apps because they figured out there was revenue in there, right? Uh, a lot of these businesses have not yet figured out how to make money with their businesses using AI, right? And these early adopters, I think they're paving the way towards that. There's very clear indication. Like, for example, how should I put it? This might come off as a little bit odd, but I always look at around 2022, early 2023, when LangChain was this big company, and I was like, holy shit, like, I can build agents or whatnot, right? And I think they're like 10 to 15 million ARR right now, and nobody knew Cursor, right? And they're like 500 million ARR right now, right? And now everybody understands, oh, there's money in coding agents, right? Because a bunch of early adopters figured out like, okay, this is the way, right? So that is probably one of the biggest space out there. And then there's customer support, right? I historically, infamously have always said every AI agent is a support bot. Even your GitHub Copilot is supporting your developers, right? So we have
Right.
yet to figure out more personas, and I think people will continue to figure that out. It's just that we need to make it really, really easy for people to put agents in production.
Right. Like you said, to deploy them and to scale them, because we're good at developing them. There's no shortage of avenues to do development very quickly.
Yeah.
So tell me this. So in 5 years from now, if Langbase succeeds, what would the world look like at that time? And then what would be some of the most exciting things your customers would be doing? Like, how big could this be? Because, we're talking about equipping the entire developer community globally with all the tools they need to develop, deploy, and then scale generative AI agents. So, if you are successful in your mission, what's that going to look like? And what are you most excited about for your customers to be able to do?
Yeah, so 5 years is a long time, right? I used to do this like in 10 years, web would look like this. And man, in AI, you cannot predict what the next 5 years would look like.
Barely 2 weeks. I think
yeah,
2 weeks is
2 weeks.
It's still pushing it.
Yeah, well, let's talk about this in October, right?
Yeah.
Right. So it's just I have noticed this thing, and we are probably building a new agent that right before the podcast I was talking about. I'm not going to share this in this podcast.
Sure.
We'll do another one for that, right?
Yeah, we could do a full part 2.
Yeah, right. I think people who are early adopters like us,
Sure.
engineers who are building AI native companies, we have figured out a lot of things about LLMs, right? Like, oh, this can be done. And it feels like we just need to figure out how to convert what we know into a product, right? Like, for example, every time I am brought into a product, or by I mean we, right? Our team, small team, 10 people, we absolutely change the shape of that product. It becomes something really, really good. And I'm trying to close the gap there, right? It's like, because this industry is so new, people don't understand how LLMs work. The moment you say, don't do this, but do this to Llama, it will start to also not do things, and a lot of many other things that you didn't expect, right? People just don't know that, right? So, in a lot of people don't know that you don't need to use this expensive LLM to do this, and you don't need to, build memory for this. This is just a small thread session layer. There's just a lot of tech being sold unnecessarily, right? Which is why we did State of AI Agents, how people are building AI agents. We are going to refresh it in next month or so.
Nice.
We are basically trying to share the mindset we have, which has helped us build agents that are building, like Command is an agent of agents, like we call it. It's an agent that can build agents, right? And it has built like 150 agents. And now it is starting to learn from you. It is starting to learn from overall 150,000 agents that it has built. Like, oh, I should probably not do this in this particular scenario. That learning, I think, is huge, right? I think that is where we are eventually headed, where
I
the
love that.
systems we
Right.
build can learn, right? And we will have to teach them. Obviously, we will have to figure out ways. Like, for example, our head of ML is a neurosymbolic guy, right? So he's into neurosymbolics. Neurosymbolics is a different science than transformers, where uh, essentially you don't have to train that much. And imagine, accessing a model which just knows things without a training when you ask it a question. So it has, uh, I don't want to go into that detail, but it's like, this is just one new thing that we see out there, right? If I am assuming a bunch of other teams are working on something similar. If something sticks, everybody in the community like us will adopt that. Right? We've gotten so far away from it, and it happened like this. I was 2 years ago. I was using ChatGPT and giving it all of my code, asking it to continue, and now we were like, okay, this is the most common pattern I do. So how about I build a CLI around it to automate that part? Right? We are discovering new patterns. And I think the most important discovery that is going to happen, and we are actively working on that, is learning, right? How do we make your agents learn both how they can be better and both how they can be more helpful, right?
Right.
I don't remember who, but um, as hey, I heard somebody say this, like in early 1900, if there was ChatGPT and Wright brothers asked it, "Can you build a plane?" ChatGPT would have said, "No, you cannot." After searching all of the information out there, right? Uh, but humans would still have built that plane, right? So I think that part is always going to stay. Humans are going to be very, very intelligent, but what we need to build are autonomous systems that can easily learn from how humans are doing what they do, right? And this, I think, needs to happen not on the model layer. It needs to happen on the agent layer, right? uh, Agents are much more broader space than models. Agents are like, websites and apps. It's like, React is a library, but it is being used in so many different ways on the web, right? So I think the layer where this learning happens is yet to be established. It's probably going to be the agent layer. We are seeing a lot of that in the coding world, and my belief is that that is happening because there's almost always a human uh, real time looking at their coding setup. When an agent is working, they're able to help that agent, like, oh, don't do this, don't go there, oh, stash this as a checkpoint. They have all this amazing tool set available, which is why LLMs in these coding agents do really well, because the human is all kind of always in the loop, versus
Right.
all these other agents where, here's an agent, here's my data, now provide support to anybody on the internet, right? So I think once we are actively investing in this learning space. One way, again, Langbase is an agents lab. We create both agents and we create the infrastructure for you to build agents, not one or the other, right? The goal is that we will be able to build really, really good agents, and we'll be able to learn from that to enable you to build really, really good agents as well, right? And this will happen on the agents infrastructure layer versus the model infrastructure layer, which will basically become, I think, in future, OpenAI and Anthropic will potentially become like AWS, right? And the startups will be on this agent infrastructure space, this agentic software infrastructure space. And ultimately, what will be left would be to, how do the agents that we have built learn from what you need to do and go to where you want them to go and where your customers want you to go, right?
Right.
These active learning systems would probably be the future, right? So we are just probably trying to lay the ground infrastructure for that, right? And I'm very excited about it. I have a very early preview of what that looks like in my own setup, and we are actively trying to make sure that that becomes a product, right? So yeah.
You do. You have a front row seat to how these enterprises are taking their context and using it with agents and then bringing it to the customer, and then what happens from there. And I think what you're saying on a high level, just reiterating it back, is you're trying to equip these organizations with ways of learning to deploy smarter, more equipped agents into production. And if you're seeing one learning with one customer, then hey, you're imagining most customers in that segment will be going through that process. And how do you scale that? Like there won't be any replacing that process. I want to ask you a question about this too, because you have, the former CEO, founder of GitHub as your lead investor in this seed round. You yourself as Langbase and the founder of Langbase, you're building the new best practices for agentic AI. Like you are sort of establishing, like you've said a couple of times today, there isn't necessarily classes on this yet. There isn't best practices all the way established yet. And I remember back in the early days of CI/CD, a lot of webinars and talks from GitHub, just trying to educate CTOs and VPs of engineering on, hey, like we can work in a CI/CD world where you're pushing out code commits daily. But here's some of the best practices on scrubbing and cleaning the code. Here's how to establish your QA team in a CI/CD world. Like, here's how to establish like the new normal of engineering leadership. Like, how do you manage engineers in a world where you're not on like a 2-week sprint cycle and then it's submitted? So how are you thinking about that? Like, getting like, what are the best practices going to be, and how do you want to educate the market on those? Because I see a similar paradigm happening where innovation's happening really quickly. You can develop AI agents faster than ever. It's really hard to deploy them, really hard to scale them. But organizations, they need process. Like they need a way to control the beast of AI and, reduce hallucinations, reduce harm, set their employees up for success. You have like all these governance and data issues with AI as well. If you're a larger organization, you need to be really sensitive about that. So as the CEO of Langbase, how are you thinking about developing those best practices? You mentioned your survey that I'm excited about to see this year, but I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah, I think what's this is a thorny question, right? So
Yes.
I think a lot of people, it has become easier to write code, experiment, right? But I think that gives people some fake sense of security that, oh, our team can do this.
Right.
And yeah, it's good that you're trying to, everybody in this AI space, when I look at it, we have to protect our data, right? There's a lot of that going on, which makes sense. But there's a lot of public data about your company, right? You lose the opportunity to experiment quickly when you pass all of your public data through the same, data governance methods for private data, right? Like I was talking to this huge telecom company. They're like, "Oh, we cannot use your cloud." But then on-prem, it will take you a lot longer to figure out what we continue to figure out on our cloud, because this is a new space, right? And we ended up with like, how much of this data is already public? And they said, oh, yeah, almost like 65% of this is public. Then why do you care, right? This is public. It's already being trained on, right? I think I'm not no expert at, setting up internal policies or whatnot. I'm not a
Sure.
lawyer or anything,
Right.
right? But I
Right.
think that needs to that needs to change a little bit. Like, your private and public repositories of data are different, and you should be able to experiment a lot with your public data very quickly, and not make it go through the same rigorous process of like, it has to be like, for example, this customer wanted everything on-prem. They spent like, I don't know, $12 million setting up fine-tuned Llama infrastructure or whatnot. By that time, Llama 4 was already here in other latest models, and that infrastructure was not working for the latest models. They had already wasted like, I don't know, 6-7 months doing that, while 60+% of that data is public, right? So this is just, I think if one of the learnings that I can already share is this entire community will move forward if it is a shared learning. If we know that we can easily experiment with the public data, it doesn't have to go through this. I have this feeling where a lot of big teams, enterprise, when they hear about AI, they think about like, oh, let's lock everything down. Let's make sure it's PII is there, evals are there, nothing is being. But I think locking all of that down, especially for your public data, just slows down any kind of innovation you plan. And a lot of leaders in this space do not realize this. And then we see this, oh, we built a lot of agents. None of them are actually public. Right? None of them are in production. We are figuring that out. We have written a lot of evals. We have used this and that. But are your customers actually interfacing with any kind of agents? No, not yet. Right? So I think what I'm trying to do is kind of increase the pace of adoption and deployment one way or the other. Either it is with us or with some of our competitors. I don't mind as far as the entire community moves forward quickly versus being like, we will spend next 3 months on this on-prem deployment. We will do on-prem deployment has its space, but I think a lot of experimentation could happen on your public data from day one, right? And many companies are doing this, and they are, I think, early adopters in this space, and they're moving at Godspeed, right? So that is, I think, a best practice that probably needs to be adopted a lot more, right? That I think will help the entire community move really, really fast, versus the concerns of everything private or whatnot, right? This is just a silly take, but I think this is what ends up being a decision factor in a lot of enterprise calls that I'm part of. Like, let's start with your private public data. If you like what you've built, you will have enough experimentation, enough evals, enough everything to expand that into your private data later on, right? But if you start with the hardest problem there is, eventually everything slows down, right? And this space is more complicated than it seems. Like JavaScript, like I keep telling people, JavaScript seems very, very easy. Only when you start building with it, you're like, oh, so I have to take care of this and this and that, right? So anyway, more on that on our State of AI agents later this year, right? Hopefully that will be a huge help. We'll probably be processing more than 1 billion tokens from every month. So it will be like 12 billion plus tokens, at least, of our public data, free users in that report, compared to 2 billion from last year. So we have seen a lot new things in it. So pretty excited about that as
Yeah, same here. And we'll be sure to publish that on the Banyan side as that comes out. And I really like this insight you shared with us around try to look at your data and figure out what's already publicly available versus being being truly private data. And from there, use that publicly available data to experiment, to run agentic calls over that and figure out what can actually be done with your business, so you can move at a speed that's actually keeping up with the potential innovation. I haven't heard anybody really talk about that in that specific way, and it makes sense around you wanting to establish that as a best practice versus trying to go deploy on premise, going down that road, or even a VPC deployment, which could take weeks or months, sometimes even years, worst case scenario. And just comes with a ton of DevOps overhead. Well, Ahmad, thank you so much for jumping on today, and really, really excited to see what you build next. And congrats again on the seed round. Really appreciate it.